Good morning, my name is LeAnn Lux. I'm one of the new extension plant pathologists covering soybeans and peanuts at North Carolina State in the Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about some disease management trials, some foliar fungicide trials, and also just give you a little background about who I am and what I'm hoping to do in soybean research coming up. So, as I said, a little bit of background about myself, the direction of the soybean pathology program, factors influencing maybe fungicide application decisions, and also timing and efficacy of different products, such as weather conditions that can influence a lot of the disease pressure risk in our locations, different locations throughout the state. And then I'll just wrap up with those results from the foliar fungicide trials that Dr. Rachel Vann and also Jeff Chandler with on-farm trials with all the county agents have been working on this past year. So a little bit about myself. I grew up on a small farm in southern Indiana. My parents raised corn and soybeans, and that's really what got me interested in agriculture. But I was really interested in the biology side of things, so I pursued agriculture at Purdue, but studied plant science, plant biology, and also worked for an extension plant pathologist while I was there. And I really fell in love with plant pathology, and that's where I got interested in that, but then I also had an interest in extension as well. So I moved up to NDSU in 2018 upon graduating from Purdue and studied under an extension plant pathologist there. I grew up with corn and soybeans, but I wanted a little bit different crop to work on just to get some exposure to different row crops. So I worked on 3 different diseases of wheat there. This picture of Fusarium head blight, which I'm sure you all have heard about it before, as it's pretty common in all wheat growing regions. I also worked on the disease ergot, which is a really old disease, but there aren't really any good management practices. And it's a really old disease, but in North Dakota, they still have some pretty big problems with it. Growers still have wheat in their bins that is contaminated with ergot from 2018. So it's a pretty big problem for growers. And then there was also a new and emerging disease called bacterial leaf streak, and we're really looking at evaluating the different variety responses and different resistance to bacterial leaf streak and what those yields looked like. So a lot of those trials were, and experiments were really done, they were applied research projects, screening for host resistance, also evaluating crop protective products, fungicide efficacy trials, and fungicide timing trials. But I just graduated from North Dakota State back in last May, so started at North Carolina State about 7 or 8 months ago now. And so the first 6 months I was really just trying to get out to the fields with county agents and also with growers just to understand and really learn what row crop production was like in North Carolina compared to what I was used to the Midwest. I also attended a few different classes from the agronomists throughout the summer, trying to learn as much as possible. And so some soybean diseases that I saw a lot of this summer, stem canker, Phytophthora root rot, and various foliar diseases, Septoria brown spot, Cercospora leaf blight, and frog eye leaf spot were the primary ones, though varied across the state in severity. So what I learned, though, is that North Carolina is pretty unique. So how many have heard of the disease triangle before? So there's 3 components to the disease triangle. You have your susceptible host on one side, you have a virulent pathogen that will cause the disease on the other side, and that third component is environment. And so with these 3 components of the disease triangle, it is sure that you would probably have a disease, but it would vary in maybe severity or pressure. But without one of those components of the disease triangle, you probably won't expect to see a lot of disease. So in that disease triangle, there's environment, there's maturity groups with that susceptible host. All these different maturity groups that are grown in North Carolina make it a very unique and complex state when managing those soybean diseases. Also dealing with a lot of different planting dates throughout the state and different crop rotations. I'm used to corn and soybeans in Indiana, and then in North Dakota there's a variety of different crops, but a lot of that is the corn, soybeans, and wheat rotation up there as well. So today I'm going to talk specifically about the environmental side of that disease triangle. And so moving into what types of projects I'm going to be working on this next year is really targeting how environment influences disease pressures when managing these diseases on soybeans. So one of the trials that Dr. Van and I have been working on this past year is a multi-regional trial with different states, and we're looking at fungicide efficacy, but we also have deployed these spore traps. And so what these spore traps do, we're collecting them on a weekly basis, but there's microscope slides that are dipped in Vaseline. And so they're spinning on a motorized wheel there on that shepherd's hook, and they're in the middle of our trials. We're collecting those on a weekly basis, and then we're sending those off for those spores to be counted to see maybe if we can detect the pathogen prior to seeing the disease in the field. And so then we're also looking at some fungicide efficacy and timing trials from reproductive stages of when that best timing would be at different environments across the state, and also if a early or a later vegetative stage application would also be beneficial. Something else I really want to do and focus on is evaluating pathogen population levels across the state. Cercospora leaf blight has previously been reported to be caused by Cercospora cacuccii, but counterparts to the south have also reported that there are several other species that could be causing it and also may be slightly more aggressive and more prevalent than cacuccii. So I'd like to do some trials or some surveys looking at those populations throughout the state. And then also for frog eye leaf spot, you may have heard before that there's some resistance to strobilurins, our FRAC 11 fungicides. And so something I'd really like to focus on as well is understanding at what levels we're seeing that resistance throughout the state to some of our fungicides. But now moving into what the foliar fungicide trials look like for this year. We did them at 3 different locations across the state in Sampson County, Union County, and Yadkin County. And we had different fungicides that we were evaluating. We had Delaro, Delaro Complete, Lucento, Mirvis Top, Revloc, Revitec, and Stratego Yield. And they all varied in mode of action and in combination of mode of action as well. So first, just to set the stage of what it looked like for disease pressure in each of these counties, I have looked up relative humidity. So along the x-axis, I have the beginning of July to the end of August. And in blue, I have Sampson, and in the gray line, I have Yadkin, and in the orange line, I have Yadkin, sorry. The gray line is Union. And I have this arrow pointing to 80%. 80% is typically when we see a lot of pathogen development and disease progression. So when we looked at Sampson, it kind of held on average around that 80% humidity mark. And I thought was really interesting when we got to Union, it fell well below that 80% humidity mark. And for Yadkin, it also held about 80% humidity. So then I was really interested to see what it looked like for temperature. And so again, from the beginning of July to the end of August, and then the same colors. But here I have an arrow pointing to between 75 and 80 degrees. That's typically for a lot of the foliar diseases that we see. It kind of likes that temperature range more. Sampson was well above the 75 mark most of the time. It dipped below in a couple occasions. But Union had a similar trend. But when we looked at Yadkin, it fell quite a bit lower than what the other 2 counties were. So the other component of that environmental side, talk about rainfall events that may be driving that relative humidity, but also just maybe dispersing that pathogen in the field as well. But the total rainfall from each of these counties, Sampson we could see had the highest amount, Yadkin had a moderate amount, and Union had the lowest amount. So in my mind, when I'm thinking about the disease pressure or risk at each of these locations, Sampson had probably the highest disease pressure. And in terms of Yadkin and Union, Yadkin probably a moderate, but they're missing those 2, all 3 of those components. So those ones would be falling into that moderate category. But when we looked at these combined, whether a fungicide was applied or no fungicide was applied across all locations, we did see a difference of about, on average, 4 bushels per acre when a fungicide was applied. But specifically for Sampson County, where we saw higher disease pressure, we did see a little bit more differences from the non-treated control across all those fungicides that were applied. For Yadkin County, again with those fungicides along the x-axis and yield along the y-axis, we actually didn't see any differences from the non-treated control across all the other fungicides that were evaluated. In Union County, which was also a moderately disease risk environment, we didn't see any differences, significant differences from the non-treated control across those fungicides as well. So just to take home that a lot of this disease pressure is driven by those environmental factors such as rainfall, temperatures, and relative humidity. And so thanks to Jeff Chandler, he provided some data from the on-farm trials from this past year from funded by the North Carolina Soybean Producers Association. And we can see that it varied across locations, but I think that goes back to talking about those environments, just really driving home that it's really driven about how in each of these locations what disease pressure looked like based on those environmental conditions. And specifically, I'm going to show some pictures from Duplin County today that Della had in her county, and then I got these pictures from Willie Howe. So looking at those in this on-farm trial, we had a series of untreated to treated, and just going back, that was Miravis Top that was used at this location. And so from August 25th, not a lot of variability, but you can kind of see right here that darker green area where we had a treatment. September 18th, a little bit more variation, especially with that darker area right there. And then at the end of the season, October 23rd, quite a bit of differences from the treated to non-treated. And what this looks like in terms of yield, this might be a little hard to see, but the differences ranged from 57 to 69, and our lower yields by on average about 8 bushels per acre, where there's non-treated versus treated plots. So this was just an example, though, of some of that on-farm trial work that's been going on around the state that can really be a big benefit to really understanding the impact of fungicides in these different locations. But that's about all I had today. I just wanted to thank you. I'll be around afterwards if you have any questions, and feel free to contact me, and please use the QR code if you have any comments and suggestions. Thank you.